At the end of the 18th century, African Americans who could read were virtually non-existent, except for a few in northern and free states. In fact, those in power saw lack of education as the key to slaves' continuing subordination. In what became a social, economic, and political mandate, the education of slaves were prohibited by law in all southern states before the Civil War, with the exception of Tennessee. Slaves who could read did so in secret, and they made little progress in their efforts to increase the reading levels of others. Slaves and free men in northern states had a variety of ways of learning to read, often supported by the law. A New York state law required that a slave be taught to read by its master the Bible by the age of 18 or be set free. And as a result, church-related and Sunday schools became very popular, using the Bible as the foundation. Sunday schools in 1803 began to teach children and eventually adults to read and write. At the turn of the century, blacks who lived in most major northern cities were still prohibited from using libraries or participating in literary activities. They formed their own. During a period of self-actualization that began in 1828 and lasted for almost 100 years, more than 50 African American literary and library societies were founded in northern cities. Although it was soon evident that states were not providing equal services, it took many years to amass enough evidence to successfully challenge the separate but equal premise. However, prior to Plessy versus Ferguson, libraries were not segregated. African Americans were simply excluded altogether, except to either return or collect materials for white patrons. In the South, they were more constrained by the political systems than in the North, but eventually important barriers to access were slowly being removed. Plessy versus Ferguson was a landmark decision of the U.S. Supreme Court that upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation laws for public facilities as long as the segregated facilities were equal in quality. The doctrine that came to be known as separate but equal. In 1896, the Supreme Court upheld the separate but equal facilities as constitutional in Plessy versus Ferguson, which justified the creation of segregated public spaces for African Americans, which include schools and libraries. Scholar and activist W.E.B. Du Bois, then a professor at Atlanta University and a strong proponent of African American education, spoke out publicly about the injustice of public facilities that refuse service to full third of Atlanta's population. In 1905, Louisville, Kentucky would open the first free public library for African American readers, staffed and operated entirely by African Americans.